Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for this talk on Joyce Clissold and Footprints Studio with Mary Schoeser. I think it's going to be a really brilliant, uplifting talk, as usual, when Mary does a talk for us. Um, I'm Sophie. I'm the archivist over at the Warner Textile Archive. Um, Before we start into the actual talk with Mary, I'm just going to give you a bit of a overview of Warner and Sons and the Warner Textile Archive in case some of you haven't joined us before for an online talk or in person at one of our events. And I am just going to plug a few other things that we have coming up while I have you as a captive audience as well. Mary will take some questions at the end of the talk. So if you think of anything that you would like to ask, do just pop it in the chat as we go along and we'll navigate those at the end of the session. And if you have any other questions about Warner's and the archive or Braintree Museum, you can pop them in the chat as well. You can talk about that too. So for those of you who don't know, about the Warner Textile Archive, what would become sort of the Braintree District Museum Trust raised about £2.6 million back in 2004 to save the Warner Textile Archive. Mary was actually one of the key fundraisers at the time. And at that point, we then brought the collection back to Braintree, which was one of its earliest homes. So we kind of brought it home, which was very nice, back into the original mill buildings that the workers would have worked in. So our collection is primarily made up of furnishing fabrics from Warner and Sons, who were started off as fine silk manufacturers. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask, let people in at talk at the same time. So obviously need a little bit more work on that. Yes, so we would go on to then also sell a lot of really iconic printed textiles as well. So primarily, furnishing upholstery textiles that they were producing. And alongside Coulthard's, Warner and Sons really put Braintree on the map for textile manufacturing towards the late kind of Victorian period, right through into the late 20th century as well. And we are probably one of the largest textile collections of its type, at least definitely in the UK. Mary might be able to tell me, internationally as well, but we have around 100,000 objects within the collection, the bulk of those being the textile samples themselves, but we also have a lot of the original artworks, a lot of the jacquard cards, the kind of sales material, trial textiles, rule papers where they're, gridding things up to go onto the loom. All that kind of information that builds up a picture of what a textile business looked like in Victorian England right throughout the 20th century as well. We also have a really significant collection of textiles that Warner's didn't make but collected as design inspiration as well. And that is about 2,000 items and ranges from a lot of, amazing early mechanization chintzes from France, right through to incredible patchwork quilts that were bought in flea markets by some of the designers. So quite an eclectic mix. So that's a bit of background on us. Now, other ways you might be able to support us. While I have you here, obviously, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It really, really means a lot to us that we have so many people in the audience this evening. Please spread the word if you enjoy your talk this evening. Tell other people to join us. That would be really, really great. Also, visit Braintree Museum if you haven't been already. We have a really amazing exhibition on at the moment called Art Deco and Beyond, which is all about design and innovation in 1920s and 30s in Braintree. And we're really, really proud of it. We've worked really, really hard and tells a really incredible national story, international story, as well as what was happening in Braintree at the time. And that's on until the end of June. So we're kind of into the last sort of month of that. So I really recommend if you're in the area to go and have a little look there. What else? So we have a behind the scenes tour at the Archive and Museum on the 6th of June. So in just over sort of a week or so. This is all about Art Deco as well. So that's a really great opportunity to learn more in depth about some of the things that Mary's going to talk about tonight, but also all of that kind of design innovation that was happening in the 1920s and 30s at Warner and Sons. And you can book all that on our website, just where you book through for this talk this evening. I would have told you to book a Braintree Town Tour, but that's actually sold out now. That's happening next weekend. But we do lots of really great town tours around Braintree on different topics. So keep an eye out if you're interested in that. They're always really popular. And then, as part of our online talk series this season, we also have one booked in at the end of September, which is called Symbolism in Ecclesiastical Textiles. That's also going to be really interesting. It's with someone called Mariana Clayman, who is a textile conservator and researcher in New York. And she's been doing loads of really incredible research and study on a lot of the textiles in nunneries and monasteries and churches in the New York area. And she keeps finding Warner and Sons textiles popping up all over the place. So it's going to be a really nice connection to see some of those designs that are still being used for altar cloths and vestments and church furnishings still in New York. And then we have two behind the scenes tours in the autumn. If you're planning your activities for that far in advance after the summer, we have patchworks and quilts in October, which is always very popular. And then we have royal celebrations and palace decoration at the end of November, which is all about royal textiles and decoration. If you're not already signed up to our newsletter, do just either pop your email address in the chat or drop us an email on our inbox. We can add you to our newsletter. And if you're not signed up to Mary's School of Textiles newsletter either, and you want to sign up to that, then pop your email in and ask to be signed up to that as well. Between us both, we cover a lot of ground. Mary's lets people know about all the different activities that's happening online and in person, exhibitions that relate to textiles. And our newsletter is sort of quarterly and kind of updates on different research and design history and different events that are launching as well. So that's my, marketing done, as it were. Let's introduce Mary and our talk tonight. So the reason we're doing this talk is a few different reasons. It connects specifically into Warner and Sons and the program we've been doing on Art Deco and 1920s. And it's just a really nice way to add in a slightly different element of the 1920s than what we might think. I think we think of it as being very dazzling and glamorous and colors and shimmering, all that kind of Art Deco glamour. But there was also this kind of evolution of the handcrafted elements that kind of evolved, as Mary will have told me, from that kind of arts and crafts movement where, you're manifesting it in this idea of the mark of the maker in the textiles, where these designs are kind of purposely created with a little bit less refined finish, I suppose, that Warner and Sons also dabbled in. And a lot of this is stemming from Joyce Clissold's work as well. We also have an amazing dress in our collection that was made, designed, printed by Joyce Clissold and gifted to us, which is on display as part of the Art Deco exhibition at Braintree Museum. So if you are inspired to see a piece in person in Braintree, go and have a look before the end of June because it won't be on display after that exhibition closes. And we also believe that Warner Sons supported Clissold in producing some of her footprints textiles when she needed large batches, as I understand it. So there was some actual kind of collaboration and work going on there as well. So we're really excited to have Mary do the talk tonight because she really is the absolute expert on so many different things, but on Joyce Clissold specifically. Mary's really interested in how things are made, as well as what they look like, and that's kind of really part of what Joyce Clissold research it needs to look at. And she actually had the chance to catalogue in the 1990s the Joyce Clissold collection at Central St. Martin's. And this led to the exhibition called Bold Impressions in 1995. And you know, really kind of brought Joyce, you know, to the public eye, I suppose, at that point, a bit more than had been previously. So Mary's also was the archivist at Warner and Sons in the 1980s. So she has a really, you know, key connection with our collection too. And from 1991 onwards has worked predominantly as a freelance historian. She's written around 200 books and essays and articles. This might be, I wrote this, you know, a few months ago now. It might be more than that now, more than 200. And also, you know, several publications like Textiles, A Concise History, Textiles, The Art of Mankind, and contributed to publications like Bernard Klein in 2022. And has extensive academic and research background with positions at the Central St. Martin's and honorary senior research fellowship from the V&A. And she's also worked on loads of really exciting restoration work, including things with English Heritage and National Trust and other historic property owners. I feel a talk on that potentially in the future might be on the cards. You never know. And she's done about 44 curatorial projects, which includes most recently a William Morris wallpaper exhibition at the York Art Gallery last year. So I could go on. There's loads. There's amazing stuff. But she almost doesn't need an introduction because she's so, you know, the real kind of expert in this field for us. So with that all being done, I've done my bit now. I'm going to hand over to Mary, and I really hope you enjoy this talk. And I'll facilitate some questions at the end and hopefully see some of you on other events and online talks in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie. I have to live up to that now, don't I? I have to. Yes, I have to. So, hello, and welcome. And say hello to Joyce Clissold, who's on your screen on the left. She was born in 1905 and she died in 1982. This shows her in about 1925, that key sort of Art Deco date when the Paris exhibition was on. Now, she was a young woman of her time. That's part of what makes her so interesting. And she was aware of the artistic world, as I hope to show you, and very much a part of it. Now, I've set her in a hand-painted, what do we call this? A cloak, a shawl, a scarf? No, it's too big for a scarf, but the point is, it's hand-painted. And I've juxtaposed it to the upper image is by the artist Dubost at Fort Ducharme in Paris. And it's stencil printed, this one, and about the same time. And then below is the detail of that very garment that Sophie's just mentioned, that's in the museum that you can see, that was given by the daughter of Cassidy Cobb, whom you're going to meet a little later. But I hope you can see, I mean, Sophie said absolutely the right thing. What we're going to look at is this movement that was determined to show the mark of the hand. It was a very uniquely English movement, particularly in textiles. Now, so we're going to begin with her context and the things of influence to the London art milieu and the Au Fait students at the Central School, where Clissold was a student from 1924 to 1927. And there's a bit about the continental influence in the background. And as we go forward, about the creation of a handful of thriving businesses, all based on hand production. So we're going to start with the Omega, which existed in London as an artist's showroom shop, workshop, and only existed technically from 1913 to 1919. It was founded by Roger Fry. You're looking at one of the designs that was produced called Marjorie, and this was block printed in France, hence stressing that connection between these two countries in 1913. Now, it's a nice summary of what mattered at the Omega. It has Cubist influence in it. That's the fractured surfaces. It has futurist elements. That's the movement, the radical movement here. And it has post-impressionist coloring. And this is particularly important because it links to the November 1910 Fry organized exhibition in London called Manet and the Post-Impressionist. And post-impressionism itself is a word that was introduced into this country, created, if you like, invented by Roger Fry. Now, it was at the Grafton Galleries in London, and it was the first exhibition in this country to prominently feature, wait for it, Gauguin, Cézanne, Matisse, and Van Gogh. So it was a very, very important moment for the country. Now, hand modifications were, as I say, very important. Behind is a fabric called Krakow, and it's the only woven fabric that's associated with Omega. But inset in the black and white photograph is the factory of A.H. Lee up in Birkenhead. Now, you can see, and you can see the finished product in the little waistcoat, that what they're doing is hand block printing additional colors on top of the woven cloth behind to add that hand mark and to add the extra post-impressionist coloration. And this little waistcoat was actually exhibited at the Art Deco exhibition in Paris in 1925. So it's the first of a couple of points when I'm going to stress the longevity of the influence of Omega. Like I say, closed in 1919, but here they are exhibiting in the Paris exhibition of 1925. And they were also instrumental, Roger Fry in particular, in encouraging people to paint directly onto silk. And this is just one example attributed to Fry, again from those early years, 1913 to 14. Now, let's turn to Footprints itself. That's the name of the firm that you, as you'll know from the title, that Joyce Clissold ultimately becomes owner of and so closely associated with. But it was set up in 1925 by Gwen Pike, who had trained at Birmingham College of Art, together with Elspeth Ann Little. And they set up in Durham Wharf in Hammersmith. And they were supported by Celandine Kennington, who was the very wealthy second wife of the artist Eric Kennington. Now, the name Footprints was chosen because of the foot pressure used to create most of the block prints. So it has been said. I've never found any proof of that. And certainly in speaking to someone who worked with Joyce for many years, they never used that method. But it's a very nice way to summarize the slight craziness of this group, perhaps. Gwen Pike was the artist designer amongst the early years of Footprints, and she soon focused on a shop called Modern Textiles, which she opened in 1926. And it was run by Elspeth Ann Little. And Elspeth had studied painting at the Central School, as well as a time at the Slade. And she had become involved with textiles and block printing by being employed in a theatrical workshop after leaving college. And there are close connections with theatrical enterprises as well in this story. So when Clissold went as a student to Footprints, about 1925-26, towards the end of her stay at the Central, she met Elspeth Ann Little, and she also met with designs by Paul Nash. Both of these are by Paul Nash. Now, the one on the left is actually an Omega pattern, and the one on the right is a Footprints pattern, both by Paul Nash. And again, we'll revisit. He maintained very close connections with these artistic textile producing areas. She also, of course, got to know the shop, Modern Textiles, in London, in Bloomsbury, not far from where the Omega had been. And it stopped things like this. On the left is a batik by Marion Dorn, 1925. And on the right is lino print by Phyllis Barron and Dorothy Larcher, whom I hope I don't have to explain, very, very famous hand printers at about the same time. And these were sort of things were sold at Modern Textiles. Dawn, I want to say, also in the end has strong connections with Warner's, and she sets up her own business later in the 1930s and was a very good customer of Warner's, having things printed and woven there. But the Bloomsbury zeitgeist, as I call it, was the most lasting. It's what preserves the Omega legacy. And this circle of influence is shown here in these three images. The influence of Paris itself and the influence of Munich can be seen in the Fry design with the embroidery by Winifred Gill or possibly by Vanessa Bell. And then in the middle image, Charleston, the famous house, which you can still visit, which was decorated by Vanessa Bell and Duncan Grant from 1916. They spent their summers there from 1918 to 38, and then they became residents. So altogether, they were engaged with Charleston for 50 years. Again, that stretch of longevity. Now, Bell and Grant's decorative philosophy was a feeling of spontaneity and impermanence, and the central images of their kitchen, where they have hand stenciled the wall to create this pattern. And on the right is a footprints design that is possibly by Margaret Stansfield, who was probably a Central Slade student as well. And you'll gather that actually, if anybody's, well, I don't want to say young, that's a bit unfair, younger than I am, there's still a lot to know about footprints and about this gang of people who were really extraordinarily creative and influential. Now, at Footprints in those early years, we do know we can identify these two designs of 1926, and the one on the left is by Doris Scull, no surprise, called Sheep, and the one on the right is Welwyn Garden City. And what I'd like you to notice, please, is the use of what is called, amongst hand block printers, the white line. It's very indicative of being a member of this group. So the block printing, as I'm sure you know, involves digging out the wood in order to leave a proud surface that is inked up or has the dye put on it to make the print. So wherever you gouge, you create a white line. And that's very much a part of this new approach to demonstrating the mark of the hand. Very, very clearly seen, and we'll see it again. Now, in 1925 to 1933, Footprints was based at Hammersmith. And this is, you can see it, Durham Wharf. And this is a brochure. And I just like to leave it for long enough for you to look at, but I will point out the shawl of her dreams, the scarf that just goes with the tailor-made. And so it really is presenting a joyous, lively, artistic view of what they are making available. And notice in the center, they're speaking to dressmakers and encouraging them to come in and saying also, we can carry out your requirements for your own clients. And we can ensure novelty and exclusiveness that means so much. Very important features of this appeal to a very certain range of people. Now, the Durham Wharf came to be known as Chiswick Mall, and this is on the left a print by Clissold, and on the right a detail from it, so that you can see how this is deliberate, how the impression of the color is deliberately left uneven in order again to demonstrate the mark of the hand. And on the left-hand one actually gives you a fair summary of what it was like to be working in Chiswick Mall or the Durham Wharf workshop. And you can see them printing, you can see them dyeing, you can see them cutting blocks and so on. It's a remarkable survival, giving an insight into what it was like to be involved with footprints in these years. They did not use natural dyes. And on the left is a dye book. And this is a part of the Central St. Martin's collection. And I have to thank them because they provided many of the images. Baron and Larcher, who were hand dyers, they were regarded as the hair shirt dyers. They did it the tough way. But Joyce wasn't interested in that at all. None of them were. No, they just wanted something that produced the brilliant colors. And you get a sense both of how they kept track of their dyes, but also how extemporaneous their work was with all these splashes and dots and so on. Now, I think I've already mentioned that I got to know Cicely Swingler from 1931 until 1982, Joyce's death. Cicely was the master, one would say printer, but underneath Joyce's direction, she was the master printer. She said that they did a lot of messing about. And it's through her. The picture is not of good quality, but it's worth showing it. This is some of the girls in the workshop cleaning the walls and the windows and so on. And just a snapshot I was able to take. Now, Clissold post 27 was responsible for the artistic output altogether. And her partner, Germaine Tallens, looked after the business side. And Clissold did all the designing and the block cutting for this project as we go forward. And she also selected lots of local working class girls whom she trained up. And so the apprenticeships were very important to her as well, that she was providing income. And they were paid according to ability and length of service. So they got paid more as they became more experienced. They also produced things on paper. And these are just two examples to give you an idea of the sensibilities, the point of view. You know, these were young, lively women, all of them involved in this. They printed designs by Edward Bawden, by the way, for you, those of you who are interested in local history. But here are two by Clissold. The one on the left, the Hazelmere Fate, this represents the very strong peasant art movement that is part of what's going on in the background. Hazelmere, for many years, I don't know if they still do call it their peasant art collection, but they did have a very significant peasant art collection. That poster is about 1920, well, it is 1928, you can see it. And on the right, a music camp poster for 1929. So it was all very much about joining together, celebrating gatherings, so on and so forth. Very sociable. Now, that garment that's in the Braintree Museum at the moment on display was gifted by the daughter of Casti Cobb, Catherine Cobb. And she was just 2 years younger than Joyce, born in 1903, died in 1995. And she had tried wood engraving, and with some friends, including Clissold, had permission from the teacher at the Central, Noel Rook, whom we'll come back to print fabric from wood blocks on the school presses after hours, that is at the Central. Cobb, on her rented workshop space from Footprints at Chiswick Mall in the 1920s, and she went with Clissold on the summer tours that they took together with a Punch and Judy show. You can see that it was all about really having fun as well as working. And the two girls traveled with a hand cart from village to village. You can kind of make out the Punch and Judy show in the center here. Camping and occasionally being asked in for meals. And Alan Powers wrote this up in Crafts Magazine in 1995, the year that Casti died, with a quote from her: "We lived on the proceeds, which were pretty skinny." So it was all about the fun and not about making money. The puppet shows ran from the late 20s and into the early 1930s. And on the right, you can see what was called a carnival style jacket, which was probably also worn in traveling with the Punch and Judy show. And interestingly, this is at the V&A, and it was given by Olive Budd, who was another member of the Footprints crowd. Now, this lively social life went so far as the Chelsea Arts Ball, a very important occasion. This is the black and white shot is a New Year's 25-26 fancy dress, Tutankhamun theme, a few men in drag. It was held, and some blacked up as well. It was held at the Royal Albert Hall, and it was a big, big, big annual event. And students in costume got half-price entries, so they were encouraged to partake in this festive visualization. Many Central students trained by Janetta Cochran in theatre costume design took part of this. And Janetta Cochran is a separate story, but very important. I mentioned theatre, and she went on for years to be the influential figure at the Central Theatre Department and had great influence. Now, the group includes, forgive me, there's a list of names, James Fitton, Victor Passmore, Edward Bishop, Harry Perry, Celia Fiennes, Margaret Lyle, John Farley, and of course Clissold. And I've set next to it a book cover by John Farley, The Adventures of the Black Girl, Her Search for God, to give you some sense of how the liberal sensibilities were really at the forefront, and the concern about including absolutely everyone in this social world. They also put on a 12th Night Festival in 1925. So they really were very serious about the socializing that they did. It was all important to be fun. Now, I mentioned Noel Rook, and he is the person at the Central School who taught and ran the book department. And he's the person who's been attributed with the move from what was called autographic to reprographic. No, I'm the wrong way around. Reprographic to autographic lino and block printing. In other words, block printing had existed for many decades, centuries, but it had been used to create imagery that reproduced reality. And what Rook introduced was something that was autographic, that was expressive of yourself. In other words, again, the mark of the hand, showing the individual maker as an important part of this. And there's a PhD about him that explains all that. He was influential around the world in bringing this stuff forward. Left and right of it is an example of the way in which you can see that Clissold was influenced by Rook's approach. His piece is in the middle, one of his many works, and her work, in many cases, as a result of training with him, was highly illustrated. And you've already seen some nice examples. And also on a wide variety of cloths, which I hope you can also see here, in order to capture a kind of rusticity, that peasant art movement. Now, examples of Joyce's work were shown at the Red Rose Guild exhibition in Manchester in 1930, and that was the major exhibition, the equivalent of the Chelsea Arts Show now. It was founded in 1920 by Margaret Pilkington, whom we'll come back to in a minute, very influential woman. And a journalist for a local newspaper wrote that they, quote, should appeal to the wealthy bohemian, if any remain. This is in 1930, so we're just post the stock market crash. Clissold's work was also shown in the British Industrial Art in relation to the Home exhibition in 1933. So she was getting good exposure and becoming really very well known and highly esteemed. Two more examples from this period show you how lively her work is and how there is always some little bit of illustration within it. And these are both at Gunnersbury Museum. And Gunnersbury has a nice little collection because it's local to the Brentwood location where they end up at. And you can make appointments to go to Gunnersbury to see these objects. But let's return to the wider world. These are two designs by Raoul Dufy, which I hope is a name that you know. He was contracted in 1912 to Bianchini Ferrier, which was the leading innovative silk printer in Lyon. And he remained so until about 1928. And the outline that you see, well, in both of it, but particularly on the right, you can see it clearly, relates directly to wood engraving. That mark of the hand again, the rhythm and the kind of inconsistency of its placement is very important in the visual story that's being told here. He visits Vienna and Munich often, and is one of the conduits that brings this shared influence, the French influence, into the English influence. I have to say here, I suppose that Art Munichoise, the Munich style, dates from 1908, and that's the year after the formation of the Deutsche Werkbund in Munich, of which Joseph Hoffmann was the founding participant. And this is a whole nother lecture about the Wiener Works, or the Vienna, and its influence. His florals were perhaps the most lasting in their influence. And here, as I say, you see two. The one on the left is 1922, and the one on the right is 1919, a design for a print. Now, there's lots of interconnectedness across this story. And so I'll also divert just briefly into another related avenue, because this is the work of a crusade. It was founded in 1920 by Alec Walker, whose father ran a silk weaving mill, plain silks, up in the north of England. Alec Walker goes to Paris, specifically hunting down Dufy, to ask Dufy if Dufy, will design for artist design textiles that Crusade was providing, Crusade down in Cornwall. Dufy had a look at the sketchbook in Walker's hands and said, oh, no, you can design these. Your art is absolutely right for this. And so what you actually see is through Dufy's influence, Alec Walker takes up designing for Crusade, does so until 1923, into the early 1930s, again, a case where, as at Footprints under Joyce, Walker designed absolutely everything. And the one on the left, no surprise, is called Dancer. In the middle, you see George Criscuolo, and I'm sure that's a made-up name as well. We'll come to another made-up name, but the tailor dresser. The frock is in a pattern called Gaiety, 1927. Down below is the Isles of Scilly, and notice how these are, again, illustrative patterns. And then a pattern bottom right that's very like Zenortree. We don't quite know the name of it. Now, Cresta, always confusing, Crusade and then Cresta. Cresta is a spin-off from Crusade, and that's really another story. But do remember Cresta as having come through that route, influenced by Dufy through the hands of Alec Walker, and then setting up on its own and becoming these two major mail order companies selling. I was told by an elderly woman who went to Oxford that one had to have a dozen Cresta or Crusade frocks when you went up to university. That was the requirement. They were terribly chic. Now, if we stick with that story of the longevity and all this interconnectedness, this is another Paul Nash design. It's called Cherry Orchard, and it was done designed by him in 1921, and it went for printing to Footprints from 1925 to 1929, and then it went to Cresta afterwards in about 1932, and Cresta did not print their own. They sent them out to G.P. and J. Baker, who's another important partner in the story, the kind of Warner-esque sort of firms who have larger distribution. The Footprints is printed silk on the left, and that's courtesy of the V&A, I must say, and thank them for some of these images as well. Now, Nash, I've already explained, was closely associated with Omega and carried forward that vision, but he also designed Footprint signboard and notepaper. And you see one of their little business cards down below, and that is designed by Paul Nash. Again, this longevity stretching through this whole period from Omega 1913 right up through into the mid-1930s with GP and J. Baker printing these patterns. So I'd like here to compare Footprints to Crusade. That's the Alec Walker Cornwall company. The Footprints is on the left and the Crusade is on the right. And please notice that the Footprints has much more noticeable textural printing, deliberately allowing this is overlaying a little too much of the dye, so it goes when you pull it off the cloth, and using a rough hewn tool to make the marks. And this is, of course, primitivism. This is expressionism. And Alec Walker on the right, the artist designer, but he was part of a much more a traditional, one might say. You know, his father owned a silk mill up north, and so he did not allow just the extent of messiness that is characteristic of the Footprints, deliberate messiness, and we'll come back to that as well. Now, this rather startling thing is by Bernard Aidney, and here you see quite clearly the strength and power, the vigor of that white line style. And no surprise, because he taught at the Central, where Rooke was also teaching. Aidney was a member of the London art group. He was a very influential painter in his own right. And this is a linen and cotton cloth, hand screen printed by Alan Walton in the mid-1930s. And the Walton brothers had set up a firm just at that time, specifically to print hand screen printed artist designed textiles. So you can see that there's an energy that really is beginning to build up and spread. Now, Aidney taught Clissold at the Central, and he also taught Elspeth Ann Little and Doris Carter, whom I haven't mentioned, Alice Henson, Dorothy Hutton, and Margaret Pilkington. And here I must pause and just say, Margaret Pilkington is another woman who needs to receive greater focus. She created the Red Rose Guild, as I say, that very important craft fair from 1920, and went on into the beginning of the war, promoting and selling the making of artists, craftspeople of all sorts, but really important as a support for the innovative textile printers. But she also became the first director, honorary, unpaid director of the Whitworth. And as far as I know, she was the first person ever to create exhibitions that were stated as being for ordinary people. This again is this liberal socialist with a small s thinking that art must be for everybody and must engage with everyone, no matter where they came from. Now, the other interesting thing about Aidney is that he started in the book production department, but they like to mix things up at the Central, so they put him in charge of textile. He ran the textile department from 1931 to 1940, and he hired Joyce Clissold. 1936 to 40, Clissold was teaching at the Central. And this is in the Warner Textile Archive and is a Central Clissold connection. This is by Lorna Comrie, 1937, and there are a series of 4 of these. They were a competition. These were printed for Fortnum and Mason. Fortnum and Mason was, again, the innovative artsy interior decoration shop in London, and had great influence, as did their director, whose name I've just completely forgotten, who wrote a book in 1937 on British textiles. It might come to me, you never know. That's rather embarrassing. But the point
Haynes Marshall?
Hayes Marshall, thank you, Sophie. Hayes Marshall. Yeah, you see, it's good to have a partner in these things. Hayes Marshall. And these were printed at Warner's for Fortnum and Mason, but the connection is clearly Joyce Clissold is teaching at the Central. She was teaching these students who submitted these patterns and helped to select them. And as Sophie's already mentioned, Warner's did, when there was a really big order, did actually do some printing for Footprints. Now, one of the old block printers whom I interviewed in the 1980s said when they did this series of printing, remember the contrast I made between the Crusade rather tidier printing, and the footprints, very slightly messy printing. That was deliberate. And the printers who worked on these for Warner's insisted on having in writing a guarantee that they wouldn't be fined for poor printing, because all of the skilled makers at Warner's and many other firms of that ilk, of that age, paid their workers according to the production of perfect finished goods. They weren't salaried. They weren't paid by the hour. They were paid to create perfect work. And they were so concerned at being asked to do what you can see in front of you, which they regarded as sloppy work, that they had to have a guarantee in writing. And so here you can see the real character of the hand, the mark of the hand, that the block was to be slightly overloaded with its pigment, so that you get this slurpy sort of finish. And really a remarkable, beautiful, lively sort of thing. And I should also say that Amersham Prints also printed for Footprints, and it was one that used disabled workers. So back to 1933 and the footprint story itself. Gwen Pike died in 1933, and Kennington withdrew. So everything changed. The workshop then moved to Clissold's home in Brentford, on the outskirts of London. And the first of two shops opened in central London. The new larger workshop provided work for 40 to 50, trust me, that's huge in this kind of hand making industry, mainly female employees. And the shops attracted wealthy and artistic customers, including Gracie Fields. I hope that's impressive. And these were people who were looking for alternatives to the fabrics that were available elsewhere. They wanted something unique. This is a kind of arty couture taste, something that's individual. Now the paper bag is post 1935. This is, if you bought that fabulous scarf, you couldn't live it out, this is what you took it home in. And that's because it's the second shop in Knightsbridge, as you can see. The first shop was opened in New Bond Street in 1933. And on the left, just a pile of footprints fabrics. And here I want to say the style. There's always this conundrum about how does this fit in with the story everybody wants to tell about the 20s and 30s, which is the impact of the Bauhaus. There is no impact of the Bauhaus here, but it's not because they're unaware. It's not because they're stupid. It's because they know what they want. And what they want is what I call the picturesque modern. They want something that pays homage to the great tradition of mark making and the great tradition of gardening in England, that allows things to flow freely, that isn't rigid. You know, the French garden is very geometrical and planned. The English garden is flowing and companionable and so on and so forth. That's the picturesque garden. And this is picturesque modern. Now, the designs were selected from patterned books, little patterned books. And this is a detail of one. And then on the right-hand side, sort of pages from them. It was patterned books actually just made out of cloth. And those little pieces are about maybe 5 inches by 2.5 inches. That's how small they are, to give you an idea of the scale of these patterns. And these are at Central St. Martin's. And they were made up according to the customer's own color choice. So it was a couture approach to making them. And garments were made to order by the dressmaker, Madame Blanche, whose name was actually Mrs. White's. But we had to have that little frisson of a French name. Down below at the bottom, you can see how inventive they were. This is a cotton reel with lino put on the bottom of it, so that they could actually just stamp by hand with little tiny reels, making these little splotches. Now, the dresses. This front and back is a mid to late 1930s garment. This is the work of Madame Blanche. And in the middle, an evening dress of about 1935, which is at the central. And then we have a jacket, 1930s, it's at the V&A, and Huntsman, the one on the right bottom is called, and that's a woolen baize jacket of about 1943. Now here in the middle, and you can't really see it top right, in the middle is printing that's called à disposition, in position. So they were also able, because they were hand printers, to produce a garment, as you see right in the center, where they simply, the garment is made up, and then post-making, it's been printed with this lovely pattern that comes from the shoulder, runs down, enlarges, and then turns along the bottom. The jacket above is actually also printed disposition, and I'm hoping you can see more clearly what this means in this Gunnersbury example. Very careful placement. So the garment made up first, and then all of these different patterning areas and coloring areas printed in onto the finished garment. Very ambitious and very effective. My goodness, Mrs. White was very clever in being able to make these garments. And this is partly why they're so flat in their construction, so that the printing could be done in this way. They really are remarkable to see. So if we skip forward to after the war, or during the war, sorry, they did continue producing when they could, but the cloth stocks became limited, of course, no surprise. And here I love this piece. Of course, it's parachutists, isn't it? This is making joyous what is really a rather scary time for absolutely everybody. It's a wonderful, wonderful pattern. For the Festival of Britain afterwards, they made, of course, many different iterations of souvenirs for that occasion. The one on the left includes image of the Dome of Discovery. And the one on the right is, it looks as if the picture is blurry, but it's not. It's because of the method of printing and the fact that it's printed on a very fine silk chiffon. So it's very blurry, if you see what I mean, but all this deliberately. Now, as we go on after the war, the exigencies of post-war life, coupons, restrictions, limitations, and so on, do play their part. But actually, they do continue to survive. And the jacket you're looking at is at Gunnersbury. And the tea cozy, as you can half see, is at Central St. Martin's. Now, the Huntsman design can only be dated to about 1950 to 1970. They're both on linen. What I'd like you to observe here is how cleverly Joyce is reusing the blocks for different types of objects. And it was Cicely Swingler who said to me that their best sales, in fact, after the war, were at the county fairs and gatherings like that, where people who hunted and shooted, as she put it, were in abundance, and they very much appreciated these sorts of garments. Now, there's another example here. This is less evident, perhaps, but this is a dress fabric with the same pattern on it, these lovely little lambs, as used in the apron. These, of course, are post-World War II. They cut far fewer blocks after suffering a financial setback in 1938-39, and functioning on a smaller scale. But of course, they also, no surprise, had difficulty in getting the quality of wood that they wanted. And of course, the textiles were still limited. Still, Cicely Swingler, as I say, stressed that they had a very good business at county fairs, and up on the top is a tea towel. Everybody wants a tea towel. This is steeplechase, and it's in the central. And again, these horsey images, very popular. And they continued also to sell other items, including here, you see, it's very dark, I'm afraid, but it's a blocked velveteen shawl from old stock from the 1920s and early 1930s. And Cicely said the 1920s items were especially wanted in the years around 1970. Yes, you know, they were there, really kind of promoting the recycling and that style that becomes so fashionable in the 1970s. They were participating in that as well. And on the right is a portiere, or a room divider. For many of those who lived in much smaller accommodation, these were useful. And the design on that, it's a cotton canvas, and it's called Jungle. no surprise, and it was printed in the 1950s. Now, coming along to a close, I hope you have the joy of really getting to know Joyce in a different way through her drawings. These are from her sketchbooks. None of them are dated, but the jazz group really gives you another insight into how lively and sociable this group of people were. And the wonderful sense of humor. Can you make it out 2 hours later? Where is that other glove? They've been driving along in an open top car. And yes, you never know. And then on the right-hand side, European scenery, because they did travel quite often in through Europe. Now, some of my favorites are these. The first three from the left inwards are Christmas cards. And like many people in her circle, Marion Straub's Christmas cards all collected in are at the Fry Art Gallery, for example. She kept it was expected that handmade Christmas cards went out to everybody. The one on the left is 1939, A Bountiful Christmas. The one at bottom is the 1940s, no later than 1952, and that's because it says, I hope your rations will stretch as far as possible this Christmas. So we know it can't be post 52 because rationing had stopped then. And then the next one is 1970, Peace on Earth, Goodwill Towards Men. And again, always looking at joyful and humorous. The one on the far right is very interesting, and I'll pause a bit on it. This is 1981. It's a birthday card, June 22nd, to Lou Taylor's mother. Now, do any of you know that name, Lou Taylor? Very important historian, taught at Brighton for years and years and years. Really instrumental in driving forward new approaches to fashion history. And it's Lou Taylor Lou Taylor met Clissold as well. And everybody, as Lou told me, called her Clissold. Well, now, I just have to stop and say, Lou, her father, Frederick Elwyn Jones, a Welsh socialist barrister, was involved in some of the most important trials of the 20th century, including the Nuremberg war crimes trials of 1945 to 46. He was appointed to prominent government legal positions, including Attorney General and Lord Chancellor. Lou describes her mother, who is known by her maiden name, Pearl Binder, a name some of you might recognize, as a professional working woman. And she, Pearl, was multi-talented and tenacious. And she was also a socialist, a writer, an artist, a designer, a broadcaster, a traveler, and a collector, amongst many other things. Joyce, of course, was most of those things as well, as were all their friends. Pearl was a founding member of the Artists International Association in 1933. She worked on the first BBC television program on fashion history in 1937. She wrote and illustrated numerous books, designed theater costumes, there's that theater theme again, and traveled in Russia, Pacific Islands, and China. And she was a friend, a close friend of Clissold's. Another insight into that remarkable character that kept Footprints going from 1927 until 1982. Throughout her life, she was sketching, and whether celebratory events or her own travels or animals. The one on the left probably is the 1936 funeral of King George, possibly. The one in the middle is a 1959 diary of a trip to France. And I'll pause there for a minute. I go to choose a rich cream cake, and then I hurry to an empty seat. Jolly good. But, and then the one on the right is the 1982 sketchbook, which is full of animals with limericks made up by Joyce. Now, the legacy then is remarkable. And I return to that image I started with of Joyce Clissold in that remarkable hand-painted shawl. And I juxtaposed to it a painting by Robert Stewart in the mid-1960s. Stewart represents the last of the legacy of the Omega, running up through to the Glasgow School of Art. And one of the reasons that it became a prime center for the teaching of printed textiles in the post-war years. And here I need to mention also Bevis Hillier, who in 1968 wrote a book called Art Deco of the 20s and 30s. So it's not until Hillier's book entitled Art Deco that we actually begin to use Art Deco as the term for this, what I call picturesque modern style. And in Bob Stewart's painting, he's looking back at that style in the mid 1960s, really clinching what's too easy to forget was that one can overlook the impact of the 20s and 30s on the youth movement of the 60s and 70s, but you really mustn't. It was pervasive, partly because the originators in many cases were still alive, and many were still teaching in art colleges or had interned with Footprints and were training other people themselves in their own studio. Clissold and Swingler continued to take in a few apprentices until Joyce died in 1982. And much more needs to be found out about that. There's a whole generation of people who came in the next generation after Joyce and Cicely, who actually were immersed in this picturesque modern style, and then, of course, burble through and influence the young, trendy style of the 60s and 70s. But it's certain that Joyce Clissold was part of a truly influential group of young artists, and importantly, mainly women artists in interwar Britain. And that, secondly, she was just a lot of fun to be around. That's my story of Joyce.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Oh,
Really, really interesting and inspiring, as usual, to talk about these really amazing people shaping design.